Hello,
Okay.
everyone, and welcome back to the 2018 Hack Summit. We're joined here now with our final session of day 2. It's been an incredible day, and we're blessed to be here with Elaine Shi, who is an associate professor at Cornell, a Packard Fellow, a Sloan Fellow, and the co-founder and chief scientist of Thunder Research and Thunder Token, and she's here to tell us all about blockchain scalability. Elaine, it's such a pleasure to have you here, dialing in from Asia to be with us for a global audience of 157 countries. Elaine, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen with the slides.
Great. And right before you share, actually, I have one quick question for you so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background when you first started programming, when you first got into blockchain. Maybe just quickly tell us about what got you excited and passionate about your career and about coding and blockchain in general.
Well, I got into blockchains back in 2011, and I was actually the earliest academic to start doing research on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. So back then, one of my good friends, he was an early Bitcoin miner, and so he was like buying up GPUs to mine at home, and every time he saw me, he was like really excited, and like he always wanted to talk about this Bitcoin thing, and that got me started. And then I looked at the Nakamoto white paper, and I also got really fascinated. So then I wrote the first peer-reviewed publication on Bitcoin that kind of helped to re-explain Bitcoin to the academic community. And then later, like in 2013, I was also like the first to co-author a peer-reviewed publication on smart contracts with my student Andrew Miller.
That's an incredible story, Elaine. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I'll let you go ahead and share your screen and deliver your presentation. And audience, while Elaine is going ahead and sharing her screen, I just want to let you know that you can ask Elaine questions at the bottom of the screen. There's an Ask a Question button you can click on. And then if you feel inspired, you can donate to some of our nonprofits, like Women Who Code and Girls Who Code, that we're fundraising for today. So Elaine, go ahead and share your screen whenever you're ready.
Sure. So can everyone see my screen?
Looks great. Thanks, Elaine.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for the introduction. And today I would like to talk about Thunder. So Thunder is a fast and high throughput cryptocurrency. We are EVM compatible. Like if you are Ethereum dApp, you can directly migrate to our system. For instance, if you think Ethereum is like too slow or if the transaction fees are too high. Okay. Well, as we all know, 2017 is called the year of the ICOs, and 2018 is called the year of the dApps, right? So right now there are many exciting dApps. There are games on blockchains, and there are like social networks, prediction markets, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that today's blockchains are too slow, and they cannot support the need of all these dApps. And this is an example, right? This shows Ethereum transaction fees over time. And back in December last year, this was when CryptoKitties came around. And back then, because of CryptoKitties, right? So CryptoKitties, in comparison with traditional games like social network games or mobile games, it's not like they have a huge volume. Like in some sense, they have tiny volume, and yet the single game alone was like sufficient to overload the entire Ethereum. So back then, Ethereum transaction fees were like 1 million USD per day. And the system was like 90% utilized. And this is how bad it gets. Okay, so that's why I believe like scalability is one of the biggest and most exciting challenges that we face today. At Thunder, we believe we have the best technology to overcome this challenge. And even with a single shard, we can achieve 100x more throughput than today's blockchains, and we can confirm transactions in less than a second. So at the end of the talk, I'm also going to show you some demo from our testnet. Okay, all right. So what is the secret sauce to, build such a fast cryptocurrency? And today, what I'd like to talk about is the core consensus protocol behind Thunder. And it's called Thunderella, and this is joint work with my colleague Rafael Paz, right? So if you ask, for instance, today, why are these cryptocurrencies and blockchains so slow? it's because the consensus layer is slow. And therefore, to make them faster, we have to overcome the consensus bottleneck. I mean, of course, it takes more than just the consensus protocol to build a fast cryptocurrency. Like, we have to have the right incentive mechanisms and governance policies. But let me just focus on the consensus protocol today. Okay, so to understand consensus, the first thing I need to tell you about is the problem that I'm trying to solve. Like, so what is this problem that we want to solve? I'm going to call it state machine replication. Oftentimes, this is also called linearly ordered log or consensus. Okay, so I'm going to use these terms kind of interchangeably. In this scenario, we have a set of servers, and in this case, we have Google Wallet servers. And these servers would like to agree on a linearly ordered log of transactions. Now, there are two important security properties that we care about, namely consistency and liveness. Consistency requires that all of the honest nodes must agree on the same log. Okay, now the network may have delay, so it could be like your log is a little faster than mine, and that's perfectly okay, but at the end of the day, we have to agree on the log. And now, what does liveness require? Liveness says whenever a client submits a transaction to the system, very quickly, all of the honest nodes logs must contain that transaction, right? So it's not like we want to wait forever to buy our coffee. So at first sight, you may think this is a very simple problem. So why is it so exciting to try to build a distributed linearly ordered log? Why is this problem even challenging? Indeed, if all these servers were honest and they correctly follow the protocol, then the problem would have been trivial in some sense. But what's very non-trivial about it is when a subset of these servers can be corrupt, and now these corrupt or compromised servers, for instance, they can have malware and they can behave arbitrarily. They don't have to follow the correct protocol. So even under such adversarial scenarios, we want to say that the remaining set of honest servers should still satisfy these two important security properties. Okay, so that's why the problem is very challenging. So now it turns out that state machine replication is not a new problem. It's actually a 30-year-old problem, and the distributed systems community have been working on it for a long time. And it's also widely deployed in practice. For example, if you look at the high-tech companies in Silicon Valley, in fact, everyone, needs to replicate their computing infrastructure. And one way they achieve this is by deploying, for instance, Apache Zookeeper. And Apache Zookeeper is basically an open source implementation of a variant of Paxos, which is like a crash fault tolerant state machine replication protocol. Okay, so traditionally, whenever we talk about consensus, the kind of scenario we have in mind is exactly what I talked about, right? There's a single organization, there's like a dozen servers, and these servers are connected with fast local area network. So this is like tiny scale deployment. And although consensus itself is not new, what is new and exciting here is the large scale. So with cryptocurrencies, this changed the nature of the problem because we are looking at 1,000 to million nodes on the internet. And as it turns out, consensus on a large scale is a much more challenging problem. And this perhaps explains why, when you look at all these ICOs and companies, everyone is inventing and rolling their own consensus protocol. Okay, so but at the end of the day, this doesn't make any sense, right? So because consensus is just as tricky as crypto, and we all know that we shouldn't be rolling our own crypto implementation. So why is it the case that we already have 30 years of work in this area, but everyone still feels like they have to roll their own consensus implementation? And now, so what I want to tell you today is exactly this, right? So number one, why, despite 30 years of work in this area, there still isn't a dream protocol for large scale. And then second, I want to tell you about what I believe to be the dream large scale consensus protocol. Okay, so we will start with number one. you know, why there still isn't a Dream large-scale consensus protocol. And to understand this problem, it helps to look at the consensus landscape. And roughly speaking, there are two broad classes of approaches towards consensus. There's classical and there's blockchains, right? So classical style consensus are represented by protocols like PBFT and Paxos, and these are the protocols that Google and Facebook deploy. And what do we know about classical style consensus? So when the network has abundant bandwidth, these protocols are fast because they can confirm transactions in the normal case in constant number of round trips. But on the other hand, a classical style consensus, they're notorious for being really complex. And the complexity makes it difficult to implement, maintain, and to do security audit for. Also, these classical style protocols, they don't scale very well to large number of nodes. Okay, so now what about blockchains, right? Blockchains are the more exciting modern approach towards consensus. And the first blockchain style consensus protocol, of course, is Bitcoin's consensus protocol or Nakamoto consensus. Okay, and so what is interesting is, like, you know, everyone knows that Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're a huge success empirically, but actually they're also mathematical breakthrough, because now we kind of understand the mathematical mechanism through which blockchain style consensus can, you know, reach agreement. And it turns out the mathematics behind blockchains departs fundamentally from classical. Okay, so for blockchain style consensus, they have one big advantage in that the protocol is really simple, right? So the protocol rule is basically everyone will look for the longest chain, and they will try to extend the longest chain by mining the next block. So very simple to implement. And these protocols have been proven to be robust on a large scale. But the biggest drawback is that blockchain style consensus is very slow, right? So for example, in Bitcoin, every block takes 10 minutes, but just waiting for one block is not enough for security. Like, you often have to wait for 6 to 10 blocks, and that's like easily an hour. And, you know, then you have to, like, basically wait for an hour for your coffee. Okay, now, and another thing you may be concerned about for blockchains is the energy waste. So for example, Bitcoin consumes as much electricity as the entire island, but only to confirm 7 transactions per second. Okay, but for the purpose of this talk, I wanted you to take a leap of faith and basically assume that this proof of work problem has already been solved. So for instance, indeed, in some of our earlier works, we have shown that one can remove the proof of work assumption from blockchain style consensus and replace with alternate assumptions like proof of stake. And we can still preserve the exact mathematics behind Nakamoto style consensus. Okay, so that's not the focus of this talk, but later on in the talk, whenever I mention blockchains, I mean both proof of work and proof of stake approaches, right? So you can basically assume, pick whichever you like. Even though we can overcome this proof of work problem, blockchain style consensus is still very slow. And therefore, you know, this picture kind of shows the landscape. And the question we want to ask is, so what is the dream protocol for large scale? And that's what I want to tell you now in the rest of the talk. So to tell you what I think is the dream protocol, I'm going to start by explaining classical style approaches. And then in the middle, when I get stuck, I will try to combine the best of both worlds to get the dream approach. Okay, so now let's get started. And the scenario we work with here is the following, right? So we have Vitalik, who is the leader in this picture, and we have a committee of voters. And in this case, the voters are superheroes. So what I want to do here is I want to tell you a very, very simple, very natural protocol. And I want us to think together what this protocol can achieve and what it cannot achieve. So now some of these voters can be corrupt. Like in this case, Loki is corrupt. And of course, the leader can also be corrupt. And these corrupt nodes, they don't have to follow the correct protocol, and they can send arbitrary messages. Okay, so here is this very simple protocol. And step number 1, the leader is going to make a proposal. So now the proposal contains a sequence number and a batch of transactions. And remember, in the end, we want to build a linearly ordered log. So the sequence number will determine exactly where in this linearly ordered log this transaction will land. So in practice, you always want to confirm a batch of transactions at a time. But in the talk, I'm going to assume like we are confirming transactions one by one. So I'm going to call this a transaction instead. Okay, so the entire state machine replication protocol will contain many little instances of this little protocol, right? One for each sequence number. But at this moment, we are focusing on a single sequence number. Okay, so in step number 2, everyone's going to vote. So recall that in this scenario, the leader proposed a golden transaction. And if you are honest, you are going to vote based on the leader's suggestion, in which case you are going to cast a golden vote. So this vote will be basically a signature on the leader's proposal. But now, remember, Loki is corrupt, right? So he doesn't have to follow the protocol. So instead of voting for the golden transaction, he voted for a red transaction, and he voted for a blue transaction as well, right? So nothing says he has to vote only for one transaction. Okay, so now what do? We wait until we hear enough votes on the same transaction. And at this moment, we have enough confidence, right? Because we think, okay, if many people believe that golden is the transaction, then we can confirm this transaction. Okay, so this is like a very natural protocol. It's just like voting based. But one thing I want to point out is that the most important invariant in this protocol is that the honest nodes are going to vote uniquely for every sequence number. So what does this mean? If I'm honest, I'm going to wait till the leader makes the first proposal. And when I hear this first proposal, I will vote. And I will vote only for this proposal and nothing else. Okay, so this is important because with this invariant, I can actually give you a very simple consistency proof, which I will do in just one moment, right? So, but before that, let me clarify the parameters we are assuming. So I'm going to assume there are n number of voters, and among them, less than 1/3 are corrupt. In this case, I claim I only have to count 2/3 of the committee to vote. And once I hear 2/3 of the committee vote, I have sufficient confidence and I can confirm. So with this threshold, I claim that we can achieve consistency. And here's a very simple proof. So in this scenario, we have SpiderMan and Iron Man. So SpiderMan has heard 2/3 people voting for the red transaction, and Iron Man has heard 2/3 people voting for the orange transaction. And what I want to prove here is that the red transaction must be the same as orange, right? Because in this case, SpiderMan wants to confirm the red and Iron Man wants to confirm the orange. And to continue with the proof, it would suffice to observe that this red set of people and the orange set of people, in their intersection, there must exist at least one honest node. And why is this the case? This is because, as I said, the number of corrupt nodes is small, right? It's less than 1/3. And now these two sets are large. They're at least like 2/3. So if you just use the pigeonhole principle, you'll realize that there must be an honest node in the intersection. So it's very simple. And because, remember what I said about honest nodes, that they vote uniquely. So because this honest guy in the intersection voted for both red and orange, apparently, the only explanation here is that the red transaction is the same as the orange. So I've proven consistency to you. And one thing to notice that, in the proof, I never relied on the leader being honest. And the only thing I relied on in this consistency proof is the fact that the honest nodes are going to vote uniquely. Okay, so with this, we can try to think of this protocol at a higher level. Like, we are going to consider the world in which the leader is honest and the world in which the leader is corrupt. So when the leader is honest, life is all good. We have both consistency and liveness, right? So consistency, because I've already proven to you. And why do we have liveness in this case? Imagine if the leader is honest. So what he will do is he will propose the same transaction to everyone. And because there are 2/3 committee who are good, and these good people will vote for the leader's proposal, right? So very soon, this proposed transaction will gain enough votes and you can make progress. But what happens when the leader is corrupt? And when the leader is corrupt, we still have consistency, because just like I mentioned, the consistency proof I showed you doesn't actually rely on the leader being honest. But in this case, unfortunately, we don't have liveness. And why don't we have liveness in this case? Like, for instance, if the leader is corrupt, the simplest attack he can perform is that he can just crash. If he crashes, then he's not going to make any proposals, so no one will end up casting any votes. But he can also propose different transactions to different people, and then no one will vote for the same thing, and then nothing will gain enough votes either in this case. Okay, so at this moment, it seems like, we've solved almost all of the problem. And the only problem left for us to solve is this liveness thing, right? So think about it. This is like a really natural and really simple protocol, but it really gets us, quite far. So how do we just like solve this remaining little problem, this liveness problem? Okay, so now if you look at all these classical approaches, and the mechanism they use to solve the liveness problem is actually really complicated. And then I don't want to have to explain these approaches. If you look at like a lot of these classical style protocols, although the protocol details may vary, many of these protocols actually share a very similar structure. So typically there's a really simple normal path, which consists of one or more rounds of voting, right? Like the voting protocol we just saw. But when the normal path fails to work, like if the leader is corrupt, then these protocols would resort to a really complicated recovery path. And if you think about the life cycle of the system, you want that almost all the time the system is operating in this green area, right, in the normal path. But then when you look at the code, like almost all the code is in this red area, and that's where all the bugs and complexity are. Okay, so this complexity also has implications in practice. Like, for instance, Chain.com is the San Francisco-based company, and they are rolling blockchain solutions for Visa. And they basically said, okay, we are only going to implement this green part, and just forget about implementing this complicated recovery path. So what this means in practice is that when the normal path fails, like if the leader crashes, then they have to like do all this red stuff manually, right? And when the protocol, for instance, is deployed across 100 banks on 1,000 nodes, this means you have to basically go to all these 1,000 nodes, synchronize their logs, and rebootstrap the protocol. And it's going to be a very painful process. Okay, so at this moment, it seems like we are stuck. And this is when we want to start, thinking about how do we combine the best of both worlds. Okay, so now let me explain the high-level idea behind Thunderella, right? So this, what you see here is classical, but now we don't want this messy recovery path. Instead, we are going to replace it with an extremely simple blockchain. Okay, so that's the Thunderella paradigm. Although, the high-level idea is really simple. There are some subtleties when you instantiate the idea, right? So I'm going to tell you how to instantiate the idea correctly. And the terminology I will use is the fast path and the slow chain. And the slow chain is any standard blockchain like Bitcoin, Ethereum. But if you don't like proof of work, you can also think of it as a proof of stake slow chain. And the goal we want to achieve is the following, right? So almost all the time, we want the system to operate in the fast path. And in the fast path, we want to confirm transactions in 2 to 3 actual network round trips. We don't want to have to wait for even a single block interval of the slow chain. And in the fast path, we also want to avoid using the slow chain, right? We don't actually have to post too many messages to the slow chain. And like almost everything happens just on the fast path itself. So even when things are not so good, it's not the end of the world because we always have the slow chain to fall back to. So in some sense, even in the worst case, we still have the security and performance of today's blockchains. Okay, so now to describe our protocol, just quickly recall, here's the scenario. We have the leader, the committee, but now we also have a slow chain. And we, like I said, we are going to assume the leader and committee have been elected using some mechanism. But for the purpose of discussing consensus, we assume that, this election has already been done. I mean, in practice, like the election may happen, for instance, periodically, and so you can kind of evolve the leader and committee over time. And as for the slow chain, you can think of it as Bitcoin, Ethereum, or you can think of it as a proof of stake slow chain. Okay, so to get our worst case guarantees, we need to make some assumptions, right? And roughly speaking, the assumption we make is honest majority. And for instance, this is important for the slow chain to be secure, right? If the slow chain is proof of work, we are assuming honest majority in compute power. If the slow chain is proof of stake, honest majority in stake. And then we also want to assume that the committee is majority honest as well. Okay, note that we don't need to assume anything about the leader, but this is a point that I will revisit later too. Okay, so now the protocol. Okay, I'll explain the fast path first, and then I'll explain the slow chain. So for the fast path, I've actually already told you how it works. And at this moment, I just want to do a really quick recap, but I want to point out what happens when there are multiple sequence numbers. Like earlier, we focused on a single sequence number. Is that the lead proposal, everyone's going to vote, and I think the froze.
I'll hear you, Elaine. You sound great.
Oh, really?
Your video cut out for your face, but that's okay. We can see your slides and we can hear you. So keep going.
The video is it's cut out. Can you guys see the video?
We can see the slides and it looks great. So keep going. Don't stop.
Okay, just one moment. Okay, so in this scenario, I'm going to introduce a notion called notarized, right? So if a transaction gains votes from 3/4 of the committee, it's called notarized. So why 3/4, right? Because earlier I was saying 2/3. Because recall that earlier I was assuming less than 1/3 corrupt, but now I'm assuming, less than half can be corrupt. So because now there are more corrupt nodes, we have to make the threshold a little bit higher to make the consistency proof still work. Okay, so in this example, transactions 1, 2, 3 have been notarized, and 5 and 6 have been notarized too, but 4 is missing the notarization. Okay, so in the cryptocurrency system, it's actually important that you process these transactions from left to right, in a linear fashion. For example, if like 4 and 5 are spending the same coin, like they're double spending the same coin, you wouldn't discover that until you process transaction 4. Only then can you discover, okay, 5 is a double spend, right? So now in this scenario, the only prefix we can process is up to 3. And for the lack of a better term, I'm going to call this the maximal lucky sequence. So the maximal lucky sequence is what you want to confirm and output. Okay, so recall the problem we are trying to solve all along, right? How do we solve the liveness problem? So now let's get to this real challenge. I mean, of course, we are going to use the slow chain now because like so far we haven't used the slow chain at all. And how do we use the slow chain to solve the liveness problem? We are going to use it in two ways. Like first, we will use it to detect when the fast path stops working. And when we, have detected that the fast path is failing, at this moment, we want to initiate a fallback. And we want to fall back to the slow chain. Okay. So when you are in the slow chain, of course, you can still post messages to the slow chain to continue confirming transactions, but you don't want to be stuck in the slow mode forever. So you can always try to rebootstrap the fast path. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you now are these two things, like number one, how to do this detection, and number two, how to do the fallback. Okay, so first, how to use the slow chain to detect fast path failure. Now, the challenge here is that we need a robust mechanism. In particular, we don't want faulty nodes to falsely implicate an honest leader. Because if faulty nodes can falsely implicate honest leader, then they can perform denial of service attack. Okay, and how do we do this? The idea is actually very simple. Like remember, suppose the system is working in the fast path right now. Every now and then, the committee will compute a hash of the fast path log. And then it's going to sign this hash. And everyone's going to do so. So very quickly, this hash is going to gain enough signatures. And at this point, we say the hash is notarized, right? Just like the transaction getting notarized, a hash can also get notarized. So now a notarized hash is called a heartbeat, right? And then the committee and accelerator will try to post this heartbeat to the slow chain. Okay, so now the heartbeat also serves as a checkpointing mechanism because the hash actually cryptographically binds to the fast path log. Okay. So when the system is behaving normally, like you would see that the heartbeats keep beating on the slow chain. And one thing I want to emphasize here is that the transactions are confirmed on the fast path and they don't have to the transactions themselves don't have to be written to the slow chain. And in the fast path, the only thing we have to post to the slow chain are these heartbeats. But then these heartbeats, they're tiny messages. So that's why our protocol is actually not subject to the throughput of the slow chain. Okay, so suppose at some point something weird has happened, right? So I observed that K blocks have gone by, but without a heartbeat. So now something must be wrong, right? What could have caused this to happen? Like for instance, if the leader has crashed and is no longer making proposals, this could happen. If the leader is like malicious and trying to censor, someone's transactions, and maybe the committee have noticed that, and they're trying to rat the leader out by refusing to sign on the fast path. In this case, you could also see that the heartbeats would stop. Okay, so in either case, there's something wrong with the fast path, and we want to fall back to the slow chain. So the next thing to explain, obviously, is how to do the fallback correctly. Like this may seem like it's a very simple problem, but it's also a little bit subtle to do it correctly. And the problem here is the following. So suppose, in this case, SpiderMan and Iron Man, they both want to fall back to the slow chain. But, maybe like SpiderMan's network is a little slower. So he has only received notarization for the prefix up to 3. So he believes the fast path log ends at 3. But Iron Man believes that the fast path log ends at 6. So now these two guys have to agree exactly where the fast path log ends before continuing with the slow chain, right? Before switching to the slow chain. Otherwise, you lose agreement. Okay. So now this may seem like a very easy problem, but actually, it's non-trivial because this in itself is an agreement problem. So it seems like we are back to square zero. And now, in particular, like earlier when I talked about this very natural voting-based protocol, I punted on liveness. But in this case, I cannot punt on liveness anymore. I have to solve the problem in full, like to get both consistency and liveness. So now all of a sudden, it seems like a very difficult problem. But of course, we are going to resort to the slow chain again to solve this problem. Okay, and the way to think about it is like in some sense, the slow chain itself is a consensus mechanism that's always there. Like it's very slow, but it's sure and steady, right? The slow chain is still there even when the fast path stops working. So the committee can continue communicating by posting messages to the slow chain. So in this sense, the slow chain is like a decentralized bulletin board. Okay, so how are we going to use the slow chain to reach this agreement? We will introduce what's called a grace period, which contains these K blocks, right? So K is a security parameter. Like for Ethereum, think of K as like 300 blocks. Okay. So what do? When we decide we want to fall back, the first thing we do is to stop signing on the fast path. And then we will tell each other what we have seen. Like I'm going to tell you guys, here are the notarized transactions I've seen, and you are going to do the same to me. And then step number 3, we are going to try to post all the notarized transactions we have seen to the slow chain into the green part. But we only have to post those that have not been checkpointed. Like if this notarized transaction has been vouched for by a previous heartbeat, in some sense, it's already like final, and then you don't have to post it to the green part anymore. Okay, so we all do this, and at the end of the green blocks, we would have reached agreement on, where the fast path log ends. And then we are ready to switch to the slow chain. Okay, so there is actually another subtlety here in the following sense, right? So suppose at the beginning of the fallback, in this case, Iron Man believes the fast path log ends at 6. So he believes like all of these 6 transactions have been confirmed. It is important to make sure that at the end of the fallback, at the end of these green blocks, his log doesn't roll back, right? It can only grow, but it cannot shrink. So this is something we can prove. Basically, the maximal lucky sequence contained in the slow chain by the end of the green blocks must be at least as long as where everyone started with at the beginning of the fallback. Okay, so no one has to roll back. Okay, just to quickly summarize at this point, right? So essentially, I've told you how to use the slow chain to solve the liveness problem. And this basically happens in 2 steps. We are going to use a heart beating mechanism to detect fast path failure. And then we will use what's called a grace period to do the fallback. And once you are in the slow mode, of course, you should always try to rebootstrap the fast path. Okay, so just quickly revisit the guarantees. And for worst case security guarantees, we assume honest majority, right? Like I already said. But what I want to emphasize at this point is that the leader doesn't have to be trusted. Even if the leader is arbitrarily malicious, the only thing it can do is to slow down the system. It cannot break the system security. It also cannot stop the system because we always have the slow chain to fall back to. So if you think about it in this sense, the leader is actually more like an accelerator, right? So an imprecise analogy is that, so for instance, Akamai is the accelerator of the internet, but the leader here is more like accelerating blockchains. And this is important because this is why our system is fundamentally decentralized. But it's also nice in the sense that we can get the best of both worlds, right? We can get the security and robustness of decentralization, but we can get the performance that was like previously exclusive to centralized systems. Okay, so of course, when things are good, we can be fast. And what do I mean when I say things are good? When the leader is honest and online, and when the committee is like 3/4 honest and online, then everything happens very fast on the fast path. And we get high throughput as well. Okay, and if you look at this this set of conditions carefully, you'll realize that this is a stronger set of conditions than the worst case conditions. But in the cryptocurrency system, of course, we have incentive mechanisms to incentivize the leader and the committee members to behave honestly. Okay. So now to recap, right? So Thunderella is like a really simple paradigm. And you can basically remember it with the following 2 sentences. When things are good, the protocol reaches agreement through a single round of voting. And when things go bad, it's not the end of the world because we can always fall back to the slow chain. And of course, when you're in the slow mode, you always want to try to rebootstrap the fast path. Okay, so I didn't cover many things like how to do the leader committee election and our implementation. We have like a lot of practical optimizations, which I didn't have time to cover. In our paper, we also have like 4 mathematical proofs of security. Okay, so before I end, I wanted to talk about some of the deeper insights we have gained and why, like for instance, after 30 years of work in this area, we can claim to be simpler and faster than everyone else. And the insight is the following, right? So if you look at these classical approaches, they work in what's called the asynchronous model. A protocol is said to be asynchronous if the protocol is unaware of the maximum network delay. The protocol doesn't know how long it takes to deliver messages across the network. So in some sense, asynchronous protocols are universal protocols. In other words, the same protocol has to work for every network delay, no matter what the network delay is. And because of this requirement, asynchronous protocols are challenging to design, and that's why they are complicated. But if you look at Thunderella, we are in fact a synchronous protocol because we have replaced the recovery path with the blockchain. And the blockchain is synchronous because the block interval has to be like a constant times larger than the maximum network delay to preserve security. So in other words, when you parameterize the block interval, you have to know what the maximum network delay is. Okay, so one question you might have is like, why synchronous protocols have been, kind of neglected by the distributed systems body of work. And in fact, like the classical wisdom is that synchronous protocols are slow, right? Because if you are like Google or Facebook, you want microsecond to millisecond latency, and you cannot afford to wait for even a single block interval or any synchronization round. And in practice, you also want to set the synchronization round or the block interval very conservatively, because like the synchrony assumption is important to security. If it is ever violated, all bets are off, right? So if like, for instance, your average network delay is 1 second, you may want to set the parameter to 10 seconds just to be safe. But our insight is basically, this classical wisdom is not exactly right. And when you look at Thunderella, the interesting thing is that like almost all the time, the system is operating in asynchronous land, but then fundamentally it's a synchronous protocol, right? Because it has a synchronous fallback. So using this combination, we can kind of achieve the best of both worlds. We can have the fast of asynchronous, and we can have the simplicity of synchronous protocols. Okay, so what I didn't tell you yet is that this actually is also a new theoretical paradigm, because we can overcome known theoretical barriers. Like for instance, one barrier, like traditionally, if you want a fast protocol, you want to work with asynchrony. But there is a very well-known lower bound by Dwork, Lynch, Stockmeyer that says any asynchronous protocol cannot tolerate more than 1/3 corruptions. Okay, so this seems to be saying, okay, if you want to be fast, you cannot tolerate more than 1/3 corruptions. But when you look at Thunderella, we can actually tolerate minority corruptions, and yet we are fast almost all the time. So this overcomes this 1/3 barrier. Okay, now one of the greatest things about Thunderella is that it's extremely simple, and that actually goes a long way in large-scale distributed systems. Okay, and before I end, I want to quickly show you the demo of our testnet. We have launched our testnet, and then on the left-hand side is the faucet and the chat room application. Like basically, you can install MetaMask and you can get some test tokens to play with. And once you have the test tokens, you can use them to post messages into this chat room demo. And you'll see that the messages get posted like really quickly, instantly without any delay. And then on the right-hand side is our block explorer. And you can see like the blocks are being generated in less than a second. And right now, our testnet is running on more than 100 nodes. And we are seeing more than 1,000 transactions per second under nice conditions. Okay, but this is all with just a single shard. And in fact, if you pay attention to our website, there'll be links to the chat room and the block explorer posted on our website very soon. And then I encourage you guys to also, play around with our test tokens yourself and see how fast we can confirm transactions. And on this slide, like we have links to our social media. And if you are a dApp developer, you may want to sign up for the whitelist. So you can see the link to sign up for whitelist, and then you can try out our testnet. Okay, so finally, help us spread the word. We are hiring, and we have many different types of positions open. We would very much like to work with you, and please do not hesitate to contact us. Okay, thank you. And now I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Elaine. That was an incredible presentation, and we learned a lot. We really appreciated it. So while you've been speaking, the audience has flooded the Ask a Question section with a bunch of questions from the audience. Would it be okay if we took a few questions from the audience, Elaine?
Yes, that'd be great. I'll be happy to take questions.
Great. So if you click on the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's the Ask a Question section. Do you see that in your Crowdcast? And you can go ahead and click on that to open that, and you'll see all the questions from the audience. And audience, if you have additional questions, okay, I can ask them for you if that's helpful on behalf of the audience.
Okay, no worries. I think I can see the questions. I'm going to start from the top. Sorry, my network is like a little slow because I'm in China.
No problem.
Okay. Now I have the question on the top. What is liveness? So liveness is like the system has to make progress, right? Like the linearly ordered log has to keep growing. Like if I buy a coffee, I want the transaction to be confirmed very quickly. In other words, all of the honest nodes logs have to, include my transaction very soon. So there is actually a more formal technical definition, but the intuition is just like the system has to make progress and everyone's transactions should be incorporated very soon. And you don't want the system to be stuck, right? Because like without liveness, it's actually extremely easy to have consistency. Like everyone just outputs the empty log, and of course you have consistency. So a system that achieves consistency alone without liveness is like trivial to realize. Okay, so now the second question, the second most popular question is asking about whether 1/4 of the committee can cause the fast path to shut down. And the answer is yes, indeed. If you control 1/4 of the committee and you are malicious, you can cause the fast path to shut down. But in our system, we have incentive mechanisms to make sure that it is in everyone's interest to continue to participate and make sure the fast path is up and alive. So then everyone can earn mining rewards and transaction fees. So everyone's going to be happy. We also have made sure like our committee election algorithm is not going to like let a single node control like 1/4 of the stake, because otherwise, like if the single node crashes, then the fast path will shut down, and it wouldn't be very robust in that sense. So our committee election algorithm has actually been carefully thought out, and you can expect to see like a write-up about it in the near future. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Also, like what I also want to mention is that we also have token economics analysis to, I mean, the idea is like you want to encourage as much stake to participate as possible. So there's like sufficient amount of stake protecting the fast path. And if there's a large amount of stake protecting the fast path, if you want to perform a liveness attack, you have to control 1/4 of the stake, and that's going to be like, in the best case, it's going to be like a large fraction of the total market cap. And that's like a very costly attack for you to perform. Okay. And mathematical proofs and the Thunderella paradigm. We have like a Eurocrypt paper in Eurocrypt 2018. And the paper has like very detailed mathematical proofs for this new theoretical paradigm. And Thunder is the first practical instantiation of the Thunderella paradigm. Okay. Can blockchain put checks and balances on AI? I'm not sure that I understand this question very well. I'm going to skip to the next one. I have basic but very controversial question, like difference between blockchain and DLT. Blockchain is like used in different ways. Like one way it's being used is to refer to specifically the consensus protocol, but it's also kind of used to refer to like this distributed database system enabled by consensus. And distributed ledger technology, I think you can think of it as like one application of blockchain, right? So blockchain can be used for distributed ledger, but distributed ledger also, you may not need a blockchain to build distributed ledger too. Like you don't necessarily need a linearly ordered log, depending on what your application is. So I think while these terms are related, they're like certainly different. I know it's like all very confusing because, we all use these terms kind of interchangeably or together with each other. So there's also, it's not like there's like rigorous mathematical definition for these terms either, right? Like in some of these consensus papers, like we have actually a rigorous mathematical definition for like what is a blockchain protocol. And in these papers, the word blockchain like specifically refers to blockchain style consensus. But I mean, blockchain is also often used to refer to like much broader things and much broader context, more than just the consensus protocol. Okay, so now, does this mean that Thunderella is vulnerable to denial of service by injecting a large number of malicious nodes? I think this question is very similar to the one that I just answered about whether 1/4 of the committee can shut down the fast path. So I'm going to skip answering this one. Is Thunder an ERC token? We are not releasing an ERC20 token at this point. We are a layer 1 solution at this point, right? So Thunder is like a very versatile protocol. It can be used as a layer 1 solution. It can be used as a layer 2 solution. Right now, we are doing layer 1 because we are running, we have Thunder token on the fast path. But Thunder can also, for instance, be implemented as a Ethereum plasma. Like if we are running packed Ether on the fast path, then it could be a layer 2 solution as well. So that's one great thing about the protocol, because the protocol is really simple and modular, and it can also be like used to accelerate any existing blockchain. Okay. How is Thunder's approach similar, dissimilar from Hashgraph? There are many projects out there that are using DAG-based approaches, and many of these projects, like they don't aim to realize a linearly ordered lock. So this kind of changes the abstraction. So right now, if you want to be EVM compatible like us, you have to offer a linearly ordered log, because like EVM works only on linearly ordered log. So in some sense, linearly ordered log is like the strongest abstraction possible. And what we show is that even for the strongest abstraction possible, we can do it very fast and with high throughput with an extremely simple protocol. So this is kind of like the best, because now everyone uses Ethereum EVM, but in the future, if there are new programming languages and virtual machines that become popular, we can also support it very easily, because our consensus layer offers the strongest abstraction possible. But if you relax the abstraction, then there's going to be like impose some constraints on what kind of applications can be supported. Like for instance, maybe you can do payment with a DAG approach, but maybe you are not able to do support something like EVM very easily. How to get out of slow mode and go back to fast. And so in our first release, we are going to act as the accelerator. And like the simplest type of approach is, for us to post a message to the slow chain and to say, okay, now we are ready again, and let's retry at this block height. In the more general form, like you can support, more expressive policies, right? Like people can use the slow chain to communicate and reach agreement on how to retry, right? You can, for instance, re-elect the committee, re-elect the leader. So in the most general form, you can implement general policies as well. So now in our later releases, we are also going to open it up. We are going to have multiple shards where each shard can have its own accelerator. And now this can help.
Well, it looks like we've got a little bit of stuttering on Elaine's video there. We'll just wait a second for her to come back. An audience, I want to really acknowledge you for being here for so late with us. We've got Nasir Hussain here in the audience who commented, "I'm here from Pakistan and it's 6 a.m. here. I've been awake all night and it's a completely good use of time, just the right place. And thanks to Elaine Shi for joining us here and increasing our knowledge." So Nasir, thanks for pointing that out. It's not 6 a.m. here where I live, but I really want to acknowledge you for that. Elaine, we just had a little bit of a video cut out there, so I just talked to the audience for a second, but we can see you again.
So I'm
so if
not
you want
sure
to wrap up and answer any of these last questions, we'd love
out.
to hear your answer.
I was answering the question of how to get back to the fast mode. Should I go back to that question again, or should I move forward? Okay, sure. So
yeah, why don't we have just a quick explanation
in our
of that
first
one more
release,
time,
we are the only accelerator, right? So the easiest way to go back to the fast path is for us to post a message to the slow chain, like, to summon everyone to retry at a certain point of time. But in general, you can support expressive policies, like people can vote on the slow chain to decide how to continue. Like you can re-elect the leader, you can re-elect the committee. In our later releases, we are going to open it up so we can have like different shards, each with a different accelerator. And this can help to create a healthy ecosystem, right, where the accelerators can compete in offering services to users. And, whoever can offer a better service, like more stable, higher throughput, faster, can attract more users. And like for these different shards, you can potentially also choose your own policy. Like, I can have a shard where I want to rotate accelerators. If the current accelerator goes down, maybe someone else is going to take over and try. So you can, think about what kind of policy is the best. Okay, and then, right, Nasir it's 6 a.m. there in Pakistan. And yeah, thank you so much for being up so early and being here with us. I really appreciate it too. Do you plan to hire remote? Yeah, we do have like remote contractors working for us. And if you are interested, I really encourage you to send your CV to us and we'll follow up. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you so much for everyone for being here. And I really enjoyed having this conversation with you guys. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
We really appreciate it too, Elaine. We feel very lucky to have you here today, and we learned a lot. It's groundbreaking, especially that you can now have a full almost 50% minority and still have bad actors, and yet the consensus algorithm still works. It's pretty mind-blowing, and I think we're all impressed by that. So thank you so much for your time. And so, audience, please give a round of applause, and thank you to Elaine for being here with us so late today, dialing in from Asia. And to the audience, I want to thank you for being here so late with us as well. I know a lot of you are in parts of the world where it's early morning hours, and I admire that you're so hungry for this education. We had a great day today, learned from a whole host of amazing speakers, and it was a fantastic day here at Hack Summit. We're going to be back here tomorrow morning with Brian Bellendorf, who is the Executive Director for Hyperledger, and he's going to kick off a complete fun-filled last day at Hack Summit. We're going to have some more incredible speakers for you. I hope you can all be there. Tune in here for tomorrow, and thanks again. Have a great